And it's a big welcome to Jeremy for joining us today to talk about events, how to avoid the black holes. How are you today?
Very well indeed. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for inviting me onto your blab on this lovely sunny Friday morning. Here we are in London. You're somewhere else, aren't you, by the look of it?
Yes, we're up in the middle of the country, which is still very, very sunny. So that's the main thing for the weather at the moment. So tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do, and then I'll fire some questions at you afterwards.
Of course. Look, I work with clients and event management companies and event planners to make sure that events run as seamlessly and as professionally as possible. In the old days, one was called a business MC or a compere or a master of ceremonies. Nowadays, I think the term conference host, conference presenter, moderator and facilitator are more usual. So not whatever the epithet, that is the job. It's your job to sort of make sure the event runs smoothly. You're the glue that sticks it together. But of course, the event comes along at probably 70% of the way along the process. It's the work in the days and the months beforehand that count.
Okay, so when you say it's months and days beforehand, exactly how long, or what would you say is the time to kind of get involved then?
Well, as soon as possible. Of course, it all depends on the client and the type of event. Now, this week I've had 2 briefing meetings and planning meetings with clients for events in September and October. Now, both will be events where 1,000 people will be in attendance. It'll be a day's conference, and we're probably talking about 7 speakers or possibly 6 speakers, plenary sessions, breakout groups. So there are lots of people involved, and where I get involved, Cindy, is speaking to the location, to the AV people, to the management team, and just making sure that, well, my first question to anybody is, well, why are you having the event? Why is it important? And what is your message? Once you've got those basics, then you can move on. So that's where I start, and that can be anything between, well, there's no point doing it 2 weeks beforehand, is it? So, but really anything from 3 or 4 months to longer. Depends on the size of the conference.
Right. Okay. So there are an awful lot of MCs and presenters out there. What is it that you do that is different from the general people that are instantly forgettable?
Exactly. I'm very pleased you mentioned the word instantly forgettable. Many events are instantly forgettable because they either don't have an MC or a presenter, or things are in a rush, or the planning isn't done adequately, or there are people problems and technical problems that go wrong. My responsibility and my reputation is on the line, along with the event management team and the client, if things go wrong. So it's in my interest to make sure things are professional. So I take my job very seriously. I don't do anything else apart from this. And although people say I've got a lovely broadcasting voice and you should do lots of voiceovers, that's all very well, but it's a different marketplace to what I'm doing. But whereas the live event is key, and it's like live broadcast on television. Once it's done, it's done. You can't go back. As you and I saw a little while ago together. So it's about, well, in answer to your question, why should you come to me? Well, okay, I suppose self-referential is not really a testimonial, isn't a recommendation, but the point is, I like to think people employ me because I'm reliable. I get there on time. I'm there at the beginning. I'm there during, and I'm there after the end. I mean, it's a process for me. So the whole point of the exercise is to earn well from this business, and you only do that by being rebooked at the end of a conference. I mean, you can have all the testimonials in the world, but if things go wrong, it's the guy on stage holding it together that has the problems,
So you mentioned a little while ago about black holes, and that as part of your job is to think ahead and head them off. What type of black holes are we talking about here?
Well, you and I saw one the other evening. It's when, the voice of God pronounces someone's name wrong. Now, that wasn't so terrible, but again, it was, and as it happens, the compere himself twisted something round, so it was okay. But the point is that can go wrong. But essentially, there are two major things that can go wrong. There's technology and there's people. I'll start with people because human beings being human beings, things can go wrong with them. First of all, a speaker may not turn up. So what is your plan B?
Mm-hmm.
A speaker may bomb on the day. So should the MC or the compere intervene at that point? People are late. People get stuck on trains. People come to the wrong location. As happened to me last night with a speaker who should have been somewhere at 6:30. Went to the wrong hotel and got to us at 7:05, and he was on the stage at 15:15. Now, luckily, we got away with it. But again, had I not phoned that man, so there would have been a problem, and it would have ruined the whole evening. So it's about it's the experience, Cindy, of knowing what does go wrong and trying to minimise the possibilities of something awful happening. Well,
so is that you just using your experience and sort of like picking up where the event organizer may not be that quite experienced? Or
no, they're experienced, but their job is to look at the event as a whole, the catering, the location, looking after some speakers. So I always work with an event management team or event manager per se. Again, it depends on the type of gig you're doing.
Right. So it's going back to getting to know your speakers as well.
Now, that's the speakers. Now, of course, the other issue, of course, is the audience. Now, this is not a rhetorical question. What do you do at 10 o'clock when you're expecting 700 people in the audience, and because of a car crash on the local motorway, you've got 200 people have just turned up? Now, do you start? Do you not start? Do you delay? Do you try and organise? And if you do a delay, what are you going to do in the facility for the 10 or 15 minutes while people are coming in? If you are going to start, do you leave a hole at the front of the audience, or do you invite the audience down to the front? So you just got to have the experience to handle this sort of situation. So that's people, and I'm sure there are a lot more things that can go wrong as well. My favourite one is the lady with a very tight dress who had won an award, and she had to come. There were stairs on her way up, and of course she tripped on the way up and broke the heel and everything. It wasn't particularly funny for her, but it can go wrong. She could have been very seriously injured. So it's little things like that. So that's where you work with the location if you can to make things a bit customer and person friendly.
Okay, so that's what makes you slightly different from a traditional kind of MC.
Well, I'd like to add, Cindy, lots of guys have got the experience for that, but what they don't necessarily have is to sit there and shape the content with the organizer or with the client. Well, for example, I'm talking about, let's take PowerPoint presentations, and I will say to someone, well, how many slides do you have? And the answer comes back, 27. Now, I think one of the problems with conferences is that they suffer from something called TMI, too much information. And when you've got 500 people, 1,000 people jammed into a conference, and they're hearing speaker after speaker, slide after slide, less is more. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use PowerPoint, but if you're going to use PowerPoint, use it correctly. I mean, we've both been to conferences where there's someone who uses their slides as a crutch, which is completely wrong. So it's just giving people some guidance and some indeed training. Now, obviously, if I'm asked to do training, that obviously increases the budget for the client. But if you're spending 50, 100, 200,000 pounds on a location and an event, spend some money making sure that all your speakers are up to scratch.
Right. So it's just working with the conference organizer, not making them feel like you're stepping on their toes, but sort of like gently giving them some proper backup.
Yeah. I mean, we had this discussion the other day. I mentioned the number of speakers. The one in September, they're having 8 speakers. And I said, I think that's too many. I think you should break the morning up and and have a panel discussion. Have a natural break, and they've agreed. Although there's going to be a couple of breakout sessions, but speaker after speaker after speaker, it really is not great. Not great.
So again, it's coming back down to just keeping the flow and keeping the energy up and making sure that the experience of the audience is key. And I think a lot of people actually do forget about that.
It's all about the customer or user experience. You see, you've got the cost of the location, you've got the cost of the speakers, the cost of the MC, the cost of getting people there. What about the hourly rate of the delegate who's sitting in the audience? Now, if you've got 500 people earning an average of £50,000 a year, do the maths yourself. They won't come back to your next event unless they get something out of it. It's all about selling yourself and giving people a good experience. Okay,
so then from your perspective then, a conference and event presenter is just more than the master of ceremonies or the MCs, where they're just sort of like red jacket guys just doing the announcements, which is what a lot of people tend to think.
It's a different sort of world. I mean, that is, I think it's slightly anachronistic nowadays. I mean, those guys, I mean, they're great for weddings and bar mitzvahs and, you know, circumcisions, I don't know, whatever. But I mean, for today's modern business conference, I think that sort of thing is a little bit outdated and outmoded, unless you're doing something with royalty or the Corporation of London or something which is regal or civic. We're talking about Congress and conferences. I think things are quite different there. You know, you've got to be professional and measured, and without being, in my opinion, over the top. It's if you're into football or any sort of sport, really, a good referee you will not notice. If that sort of makes sense.
So that's also including when you have like a technology breakdown, by any chance?
Yes. Yeah, excuse me. Now, what sort of technology breakdown are we talking about? I mean, there can be disasters. But again, you've just got to think. You've just got to work with the AV crew, work with the location. But what do you do if there's a power cut? You've always got to have some sort of plan B. If someone's got presentations, have a backup of those presentations. Have a whiteboard ready. Have something. Do what you can just in case. I mean, you can't worry about major disasters, but just try and think about what potentially could go wrong with slides and so on. Microphones go wrong. I'm not suggesting you have a fog. You have a loud hailer ready, but just think of what could go potentially wrong and try and work around it and agree it with everybody you're working with. So if something should go wrong, things can just move on seamlessly.
Okay. Now, I went to a conference earlier on during this week, and I noticed there was a panel discussion. So they'd kind of followed some of your advice about how to have speakers in the morning, panel in the afternoon. But the person who was comparing that, he'd never done one before.
Oh dear.
And he said, I'd got my list of questions, and I'm going to ask them some questions and ask the questions from the floor.
Right.
Now, what would your advice be to somebody who has been thrown into that position, number one? And number two, is it always a good idea to do that? And the question number three is, can anyone do that? Because that's the first thing that most conference organisers think, we can just get the boss to do it.
No, this is yes, I have a bit of an issue with that. Sometimes the boss can do it. I'd rather the boss or the sales director or the marketing director, have a speech or do a speech. And we've been to conferences time after time. They're not necessarily natural speakers. Some are great, obviously. Some guys in the C-suite are absolutely superb, but they're not natural MCs. They don't necessarily have a great sense of timing or a great delivery in their public speaking, which is one thing. I would always have a moderator or a panel chairman or chair to handle things. You've got to be a bit of a broadcast journalist. You've got to be well briefed in the questions. Again, it goes back to doing your research. And some people can do it and learn the job, but it's much better to hire someone in who is like me, who understands what is required, which is basically keep to time, understand the politics, understand the issues, and do the questions. Now, last night, for example, I was moderating I was doing a Q&A session, not quite like a panel, but you've got to keep control. What do you do when your runner in the audience with a microphone goes to someone, they ask a question, it's answered by the chair, they having got the microphone in their hand, they ask a second question, and all of a sudden you're out of control. You've got to know how to handle the microphone. There are certain rules and regs, if you like, for running a Q&A session. But the thing to do is like anything else. Get the people to tell them, well, this is my first question to you. This is my possible backup question, and I'll be asking this of the audience. So it goes back to briefing and understanding. You can't just walk in and do a panel discussion or a panel questionnaire, a bit like question time. It's impossible. It's just not right, and it would show.
Okay, now you mentioned about understanding the politics. Talk to me a little bit more about that. Is that part of this black hole that event organisers?
Yes, it is, because if you're in a situation where you're with a large corporate and there are issues concerned about the company's performance by the public or the press, you have to be very careful. The CEO may have different views to the CFO, or and it's just seeing, how people work out. So again, it's important to understand the egos and to understand what happens, and that really goes back to doing your research so you can ask the right questions in the right way. You should always make sure that you big up the CEO or big up the CFO if you're doing with him, and don't belittle people or diminish people or undermine people. So the moderator has to be neutral, has to be seen to be neutral, but again, has to be open-handed and fair. But again, this goes back to practice and experience.
Okay, so
yes, that's black hole. Yeah.
Now, you talked a little bit earlier about getting involved with the organisers as soon as you can, right at the beginning. Does that include getting involved with the event design and the venue layout and sometimes the choice of venue? Or is that just too much on?
No, that's too much, really. I mean, I think people in that environment should stick to the planning. I don't get involved in catering particularly unless I've got a strong opinion about something. But again, I would always go back. Who's your audience? What are the numbers coming in? Where is it being held? And it goes back to user experience. Whether it's cloakrooms or food or access or transport, just try and make sure that you give people a good experience. People don't want to wait half an hour to get their coats at the end. They don't want this. They want to if they're going home, lay on some transport or different types of transport or something. Again, just make the whole experience good. That's the important thing. So I may mention these things in passing, but I wouldn't necessarily get involved. No.
Right. Okay. But
I'm
your job is
what happens on the day.
So I guess that's the difference then. Is for your role is essentially understanding their brief and helping them to deliver it so the audience has a good experience.
Yeah. To a greater or lesser degree, certainly. And there are times when all I'm doing is the link presenting, but really even then, I can't help but get involved and do that. It's very rare that I would go up, get a brief. Oh, Jeremy, we want you to do this, and that's it. Some award ceremonies are like that, which can be easy and so on. You don't necessarily need to get involved, but there again, that's a different dynamic slightly.
Okay. Now, obviously, you'll have to deal with timings and introducing one person to the next, etc. Is there a way to kick somebody off politely or interrupt them? I guess that's one of the biggest black holes and one of the biggest issues that event organisers face is getting people off on and then off the stage again.
Okay. On every event, even something for like 50 people like last night, in this particular case, there were 2 speakers last night. I spoke to them a fortnight ago. I told them your slot is 18 minutes plus 5 minutes for Q&A or whatever it is. You will stick to it. If you don't stick to it, I shall be interrupting you and making sure that you're cut off. And as it happened, and the guy did, both guys did. Now, sometimes they can overrun where you've got a flexible timing, but if you're in a conference and you've got 3 speakers in the morning, the first one's on at 10:30, and they've got a half an hour slot, yes, they have to stick to it. Now, with technology nowadays, there are lots of things you can do to make sure that their voice isn't heard. But, unless you're in some sort of political debate where people sort of rant and rave and go on, but by and large in corporate, if you've got a good MC and a good AV team crew, you would have worked with them beforehand. I always phone people beforehand and say, right, you may not have happened before, but, because there are 2 things, Cindy. There's biographies and there are introductions. A biography is something that comes off the internet, and I've seen many like this, and I've seen many conference hosts just read something from the lectern. It looks absolutely awful. It's much better you have a short, snappy, even quirky introduction to your main speaker. So I always speak to them well in advance and get there, and I commit it to memory and learn it. So I'm looking at the audience as I'm introducing them. Otherwise, the energy will be blocked between you and the audience if you're looking down. And it's much better for the events, it's much better for the experience, and it's much better for the speaker. So I always do that. And obviously, concurrently, I will make sure that they stick to time and they're well briefed.
So an experienced person like yourself, whose only self-interest and passion is making sure these things run smoothly, is more likely to learn those introductions than somebody whose day job is actually to put the event on, or
exactly.
director of sales or running the company.
or Nigel from the accounts department, or it's amazing what you come across over the years. It really is.
Yes, because I guess in all the conferences I go to, the host stroke link stroke chair, which I will ask another question on that, is often the person who's not remembered, or he's remembered least. I mean, in all the times whenever I've gone to a conference, and I've always asked somebody, who's your favourite person that you remember, who's the least favourite? They either remember the venue, the food, or the person who spoke, either good or bad. But it's never been an MC or a link or a chair.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, they run absolutely terribly way over because they decided to use the opportunity to do their own keynote.
I'll come to that in a minute. As I alluded to before, a good referee and a football match is not remembered. They let the game flow. And it's exactly the same. I'm sort of between a referee and a front of house manager at a big hotel, or orchestra conductor. It's about getting that flow going. But yes, if things go wrong, you're the one I remember.
So is there a difference between a link, a stroke chairman, stroke host?
Well, yes and no. Yes, I would say the fee. If I'm just turning up on the day and introducing a few people, is one fee. You want me to come along and work with you, is another fee. And it's as simple as that.
Right. So it's a different level of in-depth as well going on.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And just as a wrap-up question, is what's the typical type of black holes then that an event organizer should totally and absolutely look out for when it comes to?
Well, okay. I mentioned people. I mentioned technology. Generally speaking, it's about, as you mentioned before, it's about the speakers. Have they got the right speakers? Have they got their content ready? If there's an AV or a technical problem, is a backup for that content? I think these things that can tend to go wrong most of the time. When someone doesn't turn up, or there's an issue with them speaking, or there's some other problem. AV is incredibly important. I mean, the number of events I've been to where quite clearly they've had no rehearsal, or they don't know how to use a microphone properly. But by and large, most decent conferences, you've got decent technical support, and that shouldn't go wrong. But if it does, always have a plan B. And this is what I mentioned too. There's that and a few other things I mentioned. If I can plug my white paper on my website, Cindy. And there's a whole lot of issues there which are raised and so on.
We'll put the link up after when we finish this.
Kind of you, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
That's all right.
I love chatting to you, and I love hearing more about what you guys do as well. So thank you very, very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.